Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Haigh, representing Labour this morning with us here in the studio. Hi, so much to talk about. Can we? I know what else you want to talk about, but let's talk about that first of all. These kids who are here.
I mean, just absolutely heartbreaking and emotional, as the doctor just described, talking about that journey. And we've seen countless examples on the news over the last few weeks of children in exactly those circumstances. And that question you asked about how they chose which children were brought over just goes to the devastation of this war. Unfortunately, I think our response as a country to the refugee crisis, the biggest refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War, has been too slow, too complicated and far too mean. And I think the government needs to urgently step up.
Is it getting better?
I mean, we were clearly pleased to see Michael Gove's statement yesterday, but it posed far more questions than it answered. I still don't know, for example, this morning, if I can register for the website and just say my home is open to any Ukrainian refugee, or whether I have to know one in advance to be able to nominate them. The amount of money for local authorities is half of what was available for the Afghani refugee crisis last year. So we're still nowhere near where we need to be, still nowhere near what, as a country, I think we would want to offer, because Britain has always stood ready to open its doors, its homes, and our borders. I did put
that actually to the Health Secretary, and he acknowledged that, and I asked him whether they'd acted quickly enough, and he said, we're acting now, so you can read into that what you like. There was no veiled criticism there of the Home Secretary, but one wonders why Michael Gove is now involved. What's your take?
Well, indeed, and I think most of the British people would question why Priti Patel was Home Secretary and leading our response to this refugee crisis. She has shown time and time again that she does not demonstrate the principles of the British people, and our priority must be now to help those in desperate need fleeing in the very bitter cold. The numbers that we have offered visas to so far are frankly shameful in comparison to our European allies, and I think it is quite telling that you've got Michael Gove and Sajid Javid leading the charge across the airwaves and frankly taking the policy off her in government.
OK. It's too late for some. Now, I don't know whether you've seen this story. I hope that you have already, Louise, because it is heart-wrenching. The mum who was in Mariupol, did you see the story? And she literally was being stretchered out of a hospital that had been bombed. We've learned within the last hour or so that both her and her baby have died. I can't even begin to comprehend the images that we're seeing. What's your view?
I mean, we saw the attacks last week on the maternity hospital and the children's hospital this week. When President Zelensky addressed the House of Commons last week, he spoke about the children that had been killed. These are indiscriminate attacks on civilians and blatant war crimes. There is absolutely no doubt about that. This illegal crime of aggression is undeniably a war crime, and we believe there should be a tribunal set up urgently and immediately in order to investigate those, so that as soon as possible those responsible can be brought to justice.
How concerned is Labour about how close the attack was to the NATO border, the Polish border? I did speak to Lord Dannatt earlier, and he said we just need to cool our engines as far as that's concerned, because it wasn't within NATO territory, so let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, clearly NATO's borders haven't been breached yet, but we stand fully aligned with the government in its political, economic and military support to Ukraine, and we will stand full square with all our NATO allies. It is concerning, but it's well above my pay grade to tell you whether you know, any red lines have been crossed yet.
We know, I was again asking the Health Secretary about the Prime Minister going to Saudi Arabia later on this week to do a deal as far as oil is concerned, given that we're cutting off energy supplies with sanctions to Russia. And I did put it to him that, really, do we hold our nose and do business with these people? And he said, yes, we do.
Well, I think this has to be a moment and a real wake-up call for this government that we can no longer rely on foreign oil and gas, which is unstable and contravenes our values. It is shameful that we're having to have discussions at the moment about to what extent we sanction Russian oil and gas, because we are dependent on it. And a decade, frankly, of failing to tackle the challenge of climate change has left us exposed in national security terms as well. So rather than running off to other despots to look at importing oil and gas from them as well, I think we really need to step up our commitment to net zero here, invest in renewables, insulate those homes. We've got some of the most energy inefficient homes in Europe, which could actually reduce our reliance on natural gas by 15%, wiping out the amount that we import very quickly. And that would actually be a much quicker response than any of the other options that the government are talking about at the moment.
In the meantime, people are not going to be able to put petrol in their cars. It's just so expensive, and heat their homes from as early as next month. That's
right. In 2 weeks' time, people are going to be seeing an increase of as much as £600 or £700 on their energy bills, and the government are completely missing in action on it. Either they're oblivious or they're completely indifferent, because so far the measures that Rishi Sunak has put forward are like holding a tsunami back with a sandcastle. Labour have suggested that we apply a windfall tax to oil and gas firms who are raking in record profits at the moment. In the words of one chief executive of an oil company, they said they had more money than they knew what to do with. That is an affront to families across this country.
What a stupid thing to say.
I know, exactly.
I mean, seriously, come on, mate.
Exactly. When people are, as you say, genuinely worrying about cutting back the essentials, thinking about how they get to work, how they feed their families, how they heat their homes. At the moment, the Tories are siding with those oil and gas firms rather than struggling people across this country.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you.